I was midway through reviewing the quarterly sales figures when Martin barged into my office. No knock, no courtesy, just a loud, intentional entrance meant to intimidate. Typical. Elena, he snapped, tossing a folder onto my desk. We need to talk now. I glanced at the file, then at the man I'd worked under for the past 4 years, Martin Ree, the kind of man who barely noticed women in the office unless he needed coffee or someone to manage his calendar. He loved authority, and more than that, he loved reminding others that he had it. Still, I remained calm. I always did. Of course, I replied, gesturing toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he hovered. The board has decided to restructure the leadership team. We're moving in a new direction, and frankly, we need people who can lead, not just follow spreadsheets. I blinked, stunned for half a second. You're firing me? He smiled like he'd just scored a game-winning shot. Let's not be dramatic. We're letting you go from your position effective immediately. No warning, no performance review, and certainly no recognition that my department had just delivered the highest revenue growth in 3 years. I see, I said quietly. May I ask why? His tone was sharp. You lack vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest, this industry needs strong leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated. There it was, barely disguised, a jab at my gender wrapped in corporate buzzwords. He didn't see me as a leader, not because I hadn't delivered, but because I didn't fit his outdated mold. I understand, I said, my voice steady and neutral. Martin narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by my composure. He'd expected anger, maybe tears, but I'd learned long ago how to control my emotions in boardrooms full of egos. I'll need your badge and company laptop by the end of the day, he added. Your access will be disabled by 5 p.m. HR has your severance details. I nodded and stood, extending my hand. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the clarity. He hesitated, then shook my hand. Good luck out there. As he turned and walked out, satisfied with his little power move, I sat back down and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't quicken. If anything, I felt lighter. Because what Martin didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks ago, something changed, something big, and I'd been waiting for the right moment to use it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, my father smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony the day he opened the company's first regional office, the same company Martin had just released me from. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. You told me to wait, Dad. Wait until the time was right. I stood and began packing my things. Not much. Just a few personal items. A mug my team gave me last Christmas, and a stack of old notebooks filled with ideas that had never made it past Martin's desk. Outside, the office hummed with quiet curiosity. A few coworkers offered sympathetic glances. Others avoided my eyes. No one asked questions, but I could see the thoughts written on their faces. Did she get fired? What did she do wrong? I left the building with a small, polite smile and no fanfare. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of 15 years inside that company slide off my shoulders. They thought they'd ended my career, but what they'd really done was give me the green light. I pulled out my phone and sent a single message to my lawyer. It's time. Prepare everything. The response came back almost instantly. Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days. I looked back at the glass building, catching the sunlight as it shimmered. Martin thought this was finished, but he had no idea what was coming. The next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as their majority shareholder, and the smile I wore that day would be real. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in the quiet, wood-paneled office of my family's attorney, staring at a document I wasn't allowed to open until the clock struck 12 on my 30th birthday. My father had always loved theatrics. He said they made serious things feel important, and apparently, this was one of them. Elena, Mr. Harrington, our longtime family lawyer, had said in a warm, almost fatherly tone, "Your father left very clear instructions. You're not to open this envelope until your 30th birthday, not a day before." I smiled politely, half curious, half amused. "What is it? Some kind of delayed birthday card?" He gave me a look that told me he knew and wasn't about to ruin the surprise. "Your father was a man of vision," he said instead, "and he trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me in the days that followed. My father, the founder and former CEO of the very company that had just let me go without ceremony, had always believed in foresight, in planning ahead, and he believed in me. When he passed away 5 years ago, the company changed. It grew colder, more calculated, less about people, and more about numbers. Martin joined shortly after, charming the board, flashing his MBA, and slowly dismantling the culture my father had built. I stayed, thinking I could protect what was left, but now I understood my father had known something like this might happen, and he'd prepared for it. On the morning of my birthday, I opened the envelope alone, sitting in the same spot where he used to read the paper every Sunday. Sunlight streamed through the window, a quiet warmth filling the room. Inside was a letter and a formal document stamped with embossed seals. I unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten in my father's neat script. "Elena, if you're reading this, you've turned 30. And that means you're ready." I never doubted it. Not for a second. "You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition. I saw it even when you thought I didn't. I saw the sacrifices, the late nights, the integrity no one else noticed. I also saw how the company changed after I left, and I knew there might come a time when you'd need more than a seat at the table. So I gave you the table." I paused, blinking hard. My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the document behind the letter. It was a trust agreement, properly filed and notarized. According to the trust, 90% of the company's shares my father had retained when he stepped down had been placed in my name, held until I turned 30, with full voting rights activated immediately. 90%. I read it 3 times, then once more just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner, the controlling shareholder. My entire body buzzed with disbelief, adrenaline, and something else entirely. Power. Quiet. Controlled. Undeniable power. I called Mr. Harrington immediately. "Is this real?" I asked, barely able to form the words. "Yes," he replied simply. "Your father structured the trust to avoid public filings. It was airtight. The board has no idea, unless you choose to tell them." "Why didn't he activate it sooner?" I asked. "He wanted you to experience the company on your own terms first, to see who would reveal themselves, to decide if you wanted it before you used it." That line hit me hard. I'd spent years being underestimated, overlooked, talked over in meetings. I'd watched Martin get praised for ideas I'd quietly suggested, watched male colleagues rise faster while doing less. I'd smiled through it all, believing patience and hard work would eventually pay off. Now I realized it hadn't been time that was missing. It was leverage. And suddenly, I had it. I scheduled a follow-up with Mr. Harrington for the next day. "Let's talk about what comes next," I said. He didn't hesitate. "We'll prepare the documents to call a shareholders meeting. We'll notify the board once everything's ready." "Don't notify them yet," I said. "Not until I give the word." There was a pause on the line. "Elena, may I ask what you're planning?" I looked out the window of my apartment, watching traffic drift by. People rushing, unaware that everything was about to change. "I'm planning to walk into that boardroom," I said calmly, "and show them exactly who they tried to fire." I didn't show up for the mandatory exit interview. HR called twice, then emailed. I ignored them all. Instead, I sat in the quiet corner booth of a discreet downtown cafe, sipping a flat white while Mr. Harrington reviewed the final draft of the shareholder meeting request. It was official now. On paper, I held 90% of the company's voting power, a legal and financial reality Martin would never have seen coming. "You sure you're ready?" Harrington asked, adjusting his glasses as he slid the documents across the table. "Once you submit this, you'll be throwing a grenade into their boardroom." I met his eyes, my voice steady. "They pulled the pin the moment they fired me." He gave a small nod. "Fair enough." The documents were simple, as most powerful things tend to be. A formal notice of a special shareholder meeting with a single agenda item, leadership review, and appointment of new executive management. Martin wouldn't be expecting it. That was the point. His entire style was built on control through confidence. He bulldozed meetings with jargon, steamrolled quieter voices, and weaponized charm when it suited him. The board, mostly older men who admired his bravado, had let him operate unchecked for far too long. They would soon discover how fragile that kind of power really was. "I'll serve them notice Friday morning," Harrington continued. "The meeting will be set for Tuesday. That gives them 2 business days to panic." I couldn't stop myself from smiling. Perfect. That afternoon, I met with Caroline Winters, the trustee who had managed the shares since my father's passing. She was sharp, discreet, and possessed a memory like steel. "I've watched that man dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder was everything I'd need for Tuesday: ownership certificates, voting records, and a detailed breakdown of company performance under Martin's leadership. Declining employee satisfaction scores, rising turnover, excessive spending on executive perks, and a flattening revenue curve despite a growing market. "He's been hiding behind inflated projections," Caroline said evenly. "If this continues, he'll drive the company into the ground within 2 years." I nodded, taking it all in. "I'll let the numbers speak for themselves." As I left her office, I passed the mural in the hallway, an oil painting of my father standing in front of the company's first headquarters. He was younger in the painting than I ever remembered him being in life. His hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl in a red dress. Me. He believed in legacy and in people. And even though he wasn't here anymore, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder. By Monday morning, the quiet around my sudden disappearance had turned into full-blown rumors. My phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues. "What happened? Did you quit?" "Martin's acting like nothing happened, but HR is strangely tight-lipped. Whatever you did, I hope you're okay." I didn't reply. Not yet. The silence was part of the strategy. I wanted Martin comfortable, convinced he'd erased me from the narrative. Let him play king a little longer. Let him underestimate me one final time. That evening, I stood before my mirror, slipping into the navy suit I'd bought for special occasions but never worn. It was sharp, tailored, clean, the kind of suit you wear when you enter a room not to ask for power, but to claim it. I rehearsed what I'd say, not a speech, just a few lines, precise, controlled, undeniable. The truth would carry most of the weight. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and cool. The city moved as usual, unaware that inside one boardroom, everything was about to change. I arrived 10 minutes early, passing the receptionist with quiet confidence. She did a double take but didn't stop me. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. I could see silhouettes moving behind the frosted glass. Mr. Harrington met me by the elevators, his expression calm but unreadable. "They're in there," he said. Martin's already talking. He thinks this is just another quarterly strategy review. Not for long. I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and stepped forward. The boardroom door opened with a soft click. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. And Martin? Mid-sentence froze when he saw me. Elena, he said, eyebrows lifting, this meeting is for board members only. I smiled politely, placing the ownership documents on the table. Exactly. Then I took my seat at the head of the table. The silence was complete. Martin stared from the far end of the long oak table, confusion flashing across his face, followed by disbelief. I could almost see the gears turning, trying to force me back into the box he thought he'd sealed last week. Elena, he said again, his voice sharper now. This is a board meeting. As I've already stated, employees are not permitted. I'm not here as an employee, I replied evenly. I'm here as the majority shareholder. The sentence shifted the air in the room. Board members exchanged looks, some stiffening, others leaning forward. Mr. Dalton, who'd been with the company since my father's time, glanced down at the document in front of him, then back up at me, brows raised. Is this accurate? He asked, adjusting his glasses. It is, I said. 90% of the company's shares were transferred to me through a family trust when I turned 30. All documentation is in order, filed, notarized, and submitted in full compliance with corporate governance. Martin looked from me to Mr. Harrington, who calmly unfolded a copy of the ownership certificate and handed it to the board secretary. You can't be serious, Martin scoffed, his voice climbing. This is ridiculous. Why would your father? Because he trusted me, I cut in. And because he knew exactly what this company would become without oversight. The room fell quiet again. Everyone understood what I meant, even without saying it outright. Since my father's passing, Martin had poisoned the culture. He rewarded loyalty over competence, image over results, and the numbers were beginning to reflect it. Let's get to the point, I continued, opening the second folder I'd brought. As majority shareholder, I've called this special meeting to review current executive leadership, including the position of Chief Executive Officer. Martin stood abruptly, his face flushed. This is a coup. A personal vendetta. You think you can just walk in here? I'm not asking, I said, lifting my voice just enough to claim the room. I'm exercising my rights. I slid the financial report across the table. Let's talk about performance. I didn't need drama. The numbers did the work. Employee satisfaction down 38% in 2 years. Turnover in key departments up 47%. 3 high-level discrimination complaints currently under HR review. Flat revenue growth in a market that was booming. I've compiled testimony from department heads, employee surveys, and financial audits. I've also documented misuse of company funds, unauthorized travel, excessive executive bonuses, and misleading investor reports. I glanced at Martin. All signed off under your leadership. Board members began turning pages. Mr. Dalton looked genuinely unsettled. The CFO, who had remained silent until now, leaned over to whisper something to the general counsel, who immediately started typing on his tablet. Martin's jaw tightened. You're twisting data to make your little revenge fantasy look legitimate. I don't need to twist anything, I said. I have evidence. You relied on the belief that no one powerful enough would ever challenge you. That belief ends today. I let the words hang in the air for a beat. Effective immediately, I said, pulling out the final document. I am submitting a motion to remove Martin Rhee as CEO of this company. As majority shareholder, my vote alone is sufficient to pass the motion. The board secretary looked stunned. You don't need a second vote? I own 90%, I said simply. A majority by any definition. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands. Effective upon completion of documentation. Martin slammed his hand on the table. You can't do this. I already did. Security didn't need to intervene. Martin didn't resist, but as he stormed out, his face twisted with rage and disbelief, I noticed something striking. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. When the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled slowly and turned to face the rest of the board. This company deserves better, I said. So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they're going to get. Mr. Dalton nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. Welcome back, Elena. By the end of the week, Martin's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office door. I didn't move into the office right away. I didn't need the symbolism of a larger desk to validate my role. I had something more important to do first: rebuild the soul of the company my father started. The Monday following the shareholder meeting, I called an all-hands staff meeting in the main conference hall, the same space where Martin once paraded sales projections like war trophies and handed out hollow praise to the same small circle of executives again and again. But this time, the energy was different: curious, cautious, hopeful. Employees filtered in slowly, murmuring among themselves. The front rows stayed empty, as if no one wanted to seem too eager. Some looked anxious, others skeptical. They'd been burned before. I stood alone at the front of the room, no notes, no slides, just the truth. Some of you know me, I began. Some of you only know what you've been told. But let me start with this. I didn't come here to take power. I came here to restore trust. A few heads tilted. People were listening. For years, this company ran on the strength of its people, on your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered. Somewhere along the way, that was lost. I paused, letting the silence settle. I was fired last week, I said, smiling faintly. Told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked the leadership to carry us into the future. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, but the tension began to loosen. My honesty disarmed them. I didn't fight back. Not then, because I knew something Martin didn't. Leadership isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision, respect, and lifting the people who actually do the work. I scanned the crowd, meeting the eyes of familiar faces. Engineers I'd worked beside for years, assistants who were always overlooked. Junior analysts buried beneath layers of corporate ego. Starting today, everything changes. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, interns, receptionists, custodial staff. I asked what wasn't working. I asked what they needed. I asked who deserved more than they were receiving. And then I acted. I promoted Maya from customer service to head of client experience, a role she'd unofficially filled for a year while her manager took credit for every win. I brought back Kevin, a brilliant product developer who'd resigned after being repeatedly passed over in favor of less qualified men. I restructured HR completely. The complaints that had collected dust in forgotten folders, I read every single one. Several mid-level managers were quietly let go within the first week, people who had fostered cultures of fear and favoritism under Martin's watch. Then I launched something my father had once dreamed of: the People First Initiative, a new internal program designed to recognize innovation, reward collaboration, and promote equity, regardless of job title. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings, just good people doing great work and finally receiving credit for it. Late one evening, I walked the office halls alone. The energy had shifted, softer, brighter. Laughter had returned to the break room. People stayed late because they wanted to, not because they feared consequences if they didn't. Desks were decorated again. Family photos, plants, personality, the small human touches that had slowly vanished under Martin's reign. In one quiet hallway, I passed a whiteboard near the engineering bullpen. Someone had written in blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words, underlined twice. I stood there for a moment, reading it again and again. Not she took over. Not she fired Martin. She came back. That meant more than any title I now carried. The following week, I finally moved into the CEO's office. Not because I needed the space, but because the timing was right. The nameplate was new. Sleek brushed steel with clean, elegant lettering. Elena Wren, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't bring much with me, just one framed photo. My father and me on opening day, both smiling, both hopeful. I set it on the corner of the desk and sat down, not with a sense of conquest, but of continuation. This wasn't just my company now. It was my responsibility, and I intended to honor it. It was exactly 1 year to the day since I'd been fired, 12 months since I walked out of this building with a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed as not what the company needed. 12 months since Martin stripped me of my title, unaware that I held something far more powerful. And now, as I stood in front of those same glass doors, this time in a tailored suit, a sleek leather folder under my arm, and the full weight of the company's future on my shoulders, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. I nodded to the front desk receptionist, who stood the moment I entered. "Good morning, Ms. Wren." "Elena, please," I said with a smile. "We're all on the same team." The elevator chimed softly as it carried me to the top floor, what had once been Martin's domain. Now it was mine, but I hadn't redesigned it for show. I kept the original walnut desk, the wide windows overlooking the city. What changed were the walls. Photos of employees, team retreats, product launches led by names that had too often gone unrecognized, and on the far wall, directly behind my chair, hung a large portrait of my father, not as a monument to him, but as a reminder to me. I sat down, opened my laptop, and reviewed the quarterly report. Our strongest quarter in 5 years. Customer satisfaction up 23%. Employee retention up 41%. Revenue-breaking records. But what mattered more was how we achieved it. Ethically, collaboratively, transparently. The culture had shifted. People no longer whispered complaints over coffee. They spoke openly and were actually heard. Feedback loops were open. Diversity in leadership had doubled. We didn't just bring good people in, we finally gave them room to grow. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I said. It was Maya, now head of client experience. Her eyes sparkled even behind her glasses. "You ready?" she asked. "They're waiting in the conference room." I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. Let's do it. The boardroom looked different too. Not in decor, but in presence. For the first time in company history, half the board were women. Several members were under 40. They brought fresh perspectives, asked sharper questions, and made better decisions. At the center of the table sat Richard Tanaka, one of our new strategic advisors. Brilliant mind, decent heart, the kind of person my father would have trusted. "Before we begin," Richard said, gesturing toward me, "Elena has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there with every eye on me, not in judgment, but in respect, I understood something. This was the moment my father had prepared me for. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for believing in change, for making hard decisions when easier ones would have felt safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that puts people before power." I paused, letting the words settle. "Someone once told me I lacked leadership," I continued. "But leadership isn't about volume or title. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient." I smiled, not for show, but genuinely. My father built this company on those values. I'm proud to say we're finally living up to them again. There was a quiet beat, then applause. Not thunderous, just warm, honest, the kind that stays with you. That afternoon, I took the long way back to my office, walking through each department the way I used to when I was just another face in the crowd. I stopped to check in with teams, laughed with developers, high-fived marketing interns fresh off their first big campaign. In the break room, someone had baked cupcakes for an intern's last day. I took one, sat down among them, and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. Because this wasn't just a company. It was a place where people finally felt they belonged.